From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Friday, February 5th, 2021. Tony Fratto here with Hamilton Place Strategies. You're listening to the Macrocast. John Fagan and Brendan Walsh are weekly partners, our regular partners from Markets Policy Partners. And Matt McDonald with us, my partner at Hamilton Place Strategies, with us as always at every jobs report. And Matt, like we had the jobs, it's jobs day. We had the non-farm payroll report come out, and I'm glad you're here to walk us through it because it's kind of hairy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little messy.
Yeah.
This is of note. So give me a hot minute just to get through this stuff. Of note, I will point out that this is kind of what I would consider the final jobs report of the Trump administration. The Biden administration took office at the end of January, so I'm gonna, round up and call this report for President Trump, and we can take. We've done some number crunching on that, but let's go through the jobs report first. So you have a top line job creation of 49,000, which is nothing to write home about. I would say that even last month when we were talking about the December jobs number, I think we were kind of talking about, we were talking about like, look, this is kind of plateauing and it is what it is until we can really get vaccine deployment. My guess is that January is very much a continuation of that. I don't think that we really saw the ramp up and we'll talk about kind of where we are in the pandemic, but I don't think that January reflects some of the momentum we've seen in the past couple of weeks, certainly over the pandemic. So, this is a pretty anemic number signaling where we are in that above all else. But the 49,000 jobs created is paired with a pretty sharp decline in the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate went from 6.7 to 6.3%. Anytime you get a disparity between that headline jobs number and the unemployment rate, you need to dig into it a little bit more. And these are two different surveys. One is an employer survey, one's a household survey. The household survey drives the unemployment rate. For a long time in the kind of post-financial crisis, it was important to read in the jobs numbers the participation rate, because the participation rate drives the unemployment rate. So like you've got to think about it as a numerator effect and a denominator effect. You can have the unemployment rate go down either by people getting jobs or by people leaving the workforce, right? So that's the thing that we wanted to look at. And we see with a decline this sharp, not surprisingly, we see both. We see a decline in the unemployed of 600,000, an increase in the employed of 200,000, which leaves about 400,000 people who are kind of no longer in the unemployed category, but aren't accounted for in employment. So that would normally be, they dropped out of the workforce or something like that. The weird thing in this report is that almost all of that number, just on the math, can be attributed to actually a decline in the non-institutional population, which is, I guess that's more like the denominator of the denominator, right? So the participation rate ticked down a smidge, but wasn't really that notable. And part of what we're at, and a lot of this decline can be attributed to actually like a population decrease. But part of that is that this is the January jobs report includes a population adjustment for the entirety of the last year. So all that to say is that it's a little, I wouldn't read this necessarily in the numbers are accurate to the best of BLS's ability, and the seasonal adjustments, the population adjustments, this is all pretty complicated stuff right now and difficult to handle, but that is kind of what's going on mathematically underneath the numbers. So it's a little hard to read in that context, but I wouldn't read this as a like, oh, everybody dropped out of the labor force this month and that's what's driving it. That's not actually it. And it's an interesting, I can't actually recall the last time that we had this kind of a driver in the jobs numbers where overall population decline of the non-institutional civilian population was actually driving the numbers. And that's just something that historically just kind of really doesn't happen. And so to the extent that there's COVID impact, there's an aging population impact, there's lots of stuff kind of under the hood on the numbers here. And I think it's something that, anyone who follows jobs numbers and economics and stuff is just going to have to track a little closer going forward.
Yeah, and this one's a hard one always, because usually we have, you hire for Christmas selling season, and then so normally 1.5 million people are laid off technically in January. So it's a hard one as is. In COVID times, it's basically impossible, especially on the first print. And look at the revisions for December. We're down to what, 223. So I think that's more the important story is.
Yes,
it's not that we're just not creating many jobs. The economy is stalled out. I think that's the thing to take from it.
What were the continuing claims numbers? So
the last 2 weeks have come down. We're down to I think it was about 725, right?
Yeah, those are initial claims. So where are we on?
Continuing claims. It was It was about 5 million, a little over 5 million.
So, and not much change in that number, if I remember.
They've been coming down over the course of the month, but that is stalled out also. And also, continuing claims is with a 2-week lag, so you still do have a little bit of issues because the people got pushed out because Congress didn't pass the CARES Act in time.
Look, and we could look at sectors on some of this too, which you have to dive into. But I think it's safe to say that there is some movement around these numbers, and they are kind of hinky because of the population adjustments, and as you mentioned, Brendan, the seasonal adjustments that we go through. And so we'll look for trends going forward. The big picture is what you just said, right? It's like still kind of flattish on job creation. We are kind of stuck where we are, where it seems like everybody who can work in a COVID economy is working, and everybody who can't work in a COVID economy is not working. And until we, bust out with, either, probably more speedy vaccines is what we're really talking about. We're probably stuck in this rut for a while, and the large bulk of those folks who are unemployed, they're still all in the same sectors. And now
a lot of them are under 2 feet of snow, so that's not good for February employment either.
Well, I think that's the context that is important here for the markets, particularly, which is that we had a pretty lousy run of data in December. We had the surprisingly disappointing U.S. retail sales. We had the negative number on December non-farm payrolls, which was actually revised lower. It came in initially at negative 140,000, and the revision is negative 227,000. Wouldn't have made a huge difference, but still, it seemed to be teeing us up for the beginning of a really long, dark, cold winter. Certainly, Fed officials were saying that. We were getting the resurgence in cases. It was very disturbing. And there was a sense that December is just the beginning, and we're going to be really in the trough here for the next few months. And that narrative has evaporated here over the last week or so as the data has begun to pick up. And this, coming into this number, was expected that this is a pretty good number given where we are, in COVID and what people might have thought just a month ago was going to be happening in the economy now. And this came after a very positive surprise to the upside on the privately compiled ADP data that came out on Wednesday. And the initial jobless claims have been it's still elevated, but better than expected for the last 3 weeks. So people were kind of market participants were kind of leaning into this number as another positive surprise. It didn't work out that way necessarily, but it's nuanced enough. And the nuances that Matt went through, it seems though a lot of Wall Street has maybe just thrown up their hands and kind of gone about their business. Price action hasn't changed all that much.
I think you have to think. We'll get into this. We have to think that. Well, first of all, we do have this $900 billion plan that is not factored in these numbers yet, right?
Right.
That came after this survey. So that's just factoring its way in, or I guess it said maybe just started at the beginning of this survey period. And if you're on the street right now, there's nothing in this report that tells you that they're going to pull the plug on a second plan. So, it's pedal to the metal, right? I mean, we got stimulus coming, we got more stimulus coming, and they just passed reconciliation, they passed a budget resolution last night, so they could start the reconciliation bill process. And so one way or another, a minimum of another $1 trillion is going to be coming and feeding into this economy.
So I have a question on reconciliation. It's more about negotiation tactics. So you have the 10 Republican senators that offered 650 billion.
Yeah.
You can probably negotiate that up a little higher, because when you go through the reconciliation process, that has to be scored. So it's not free money. If you were the Biden administration, why wouldn't you just take the 600 today, pass it, so that you can subtract that from the bill in the reconciliation?
It's an interesting question. I mean, because you could probably get bipartisan support, but I wonder if you would get bipartisan support for a standalone $600+ billion bill. I mean, like, would they vote for it if they knew that you were still going to go plus it up in?
That's the question. Yeah,
that's the question. I think probably not. Right? I think it'd probably it's one or the other, but not both. Not both. Democrats are saying it's not one or the other. It's one.
Yeah.
And
one, not the other.
And that's a statement. There's a statement being made with this approach. This time last week, it wasn't clear whether the Biden administration was going to seek a bipartisan path which would necessarily mean a smaller number. Their commitment to the reconciliation process, basically saying to the GOP, we're going to do this without you, and going their own way, I think is that's a statement that they are going to forcefully push their policy agenda, and I think that it's also a test case to see if they can drag moderates like, the king of the Senate, Democrat centrist Manchin, and the others along with them. So
that group found that group of 10 senators coming in at $618 billion or whatever found an unexpected ally this morning, didn't they? In the form of Larry Summers. I had a chance to see Larry's op-ed in the Washington Post this morning, where kind of goes through the math, and Larry, to summarize Larry's point, Larry's argument on this is, go big. I'm all for going big. Yes, we did in fact not go big enough back in 2009. We undershot the output gap by roughly $20 billion a month, and so definitely go big and go over. But if you're looking at like sort of what we know today about the output gap and what's coming through the pipeline and what $1.9 trillion would do, is that you're not just going to overshoot the output gap. You're going to have 3 times the estimated output gap. So 3 times, so if you're going to hit it on the mark, you get to 1/3. 1/3 happens to be in the $600 billion range. And so if I were that group of 10 senators this morning, I'd be out on the Senate floor with Larry Summers' op-ed saying, Larry gets it. Larry has the math right. We should be in this range.
In fairness to Larry, I would say that the framing of this was also as a caveat to priorities on the left going forward. And he was very much framing it not necessarily as like hey, this is too big, we should be more modest, but just kind of in a sense of like, okay, if this is where you want to spend all your political capital, this may be it. And I think that is the pause that he was trying to give to the progressives in his party to say, like, look, if we do this later in the year, there may be no room for, student loan reform, infrastructure spending, universal pre-K, go down the hit list. So
Yeah, and it's a fair point. And there's no public investment in this, and you may be foregoing public investment in the future.
The interesting thing is, while Larry ran the numbers, I would say that it is. I'm not sure that this is a knowable thing, right? Is that there is an aspect of the lesson the last time around, and he alluded to it, is that we didn't go big enough. And I think that the instinct, both from policymaker perspective and among the most economists, I would say, is to lean into it, and the costs of not going big enough are worse than the costs of going too big. And so, understanding the back of the envelope math that he's working off of, I'm not sure that like you can't perfectly predict that either.
I agree.
Yeah, you never predict the landing. It's never going to be to the penny. And we saw this in 2009. Not all of, and we saw this in the last bill, the HEROES Act. Not everything was spent, and it does. Some of these are not the quick hit individual checks. Some of them are over a period of time, and we saw a lot of leftover money from that initial one that was repurposed. So.
Yeah, that's true. And look, and I'm my back of the envelope. I'm proud of my back of the envelope math back in 2009, because I remember being on CNBC and saying it's too small, and was saying, like, given the size of the economy at that time, we probably needed to be that probably needed to be double, but constructed a lot better than the way they had it constructed.
The construction piece is interesting, because I do think that, what could happen if Larry's right, a big chunk of the, at least some of the difference between that Gang of 10 and the Biden administration is I believe, state aid. And it'll be interesting to see that if we overshoot, how some of the policy priorities that Larry is talking about that may fall victim to overspending could shift to the state level, where people may say, well, you just got a big check. How can you use it for some of these priorities at that level too? Which could be an interesting dynamic going forward.
Yeah, I agree. And we could do it, like, it could end up the way, the way John talked about, in terms of, you could just have leftover money, and then you deal with leftover money, or, which I feel like I keep beating the drum on this, but I don't know why you don't do triggers for, to release the rest of the money. We did it with TARP. It worked really well with TARP. We did half the money. Everyone says a $700 billion plan. It was actually like a $350 billion plan with some extra, in the second tranche. And it wasn't, it wasn't all $700 billion, but it was available and it was there. And it's what I would do in this case. It probably, what they probably need to do is split this in half and say, we'll come back again in, 8 months, and, we'll set up the process for a vote in 8 months that says, if we, and it could be a simple majority, do a simple majority. If it's needed, you come back and you get the rest of it, depending on how things go with the economy. The other point that Larry makes, which, like, for all of us, I don't know, I'm old enough. I don't know if you guys are old enough to actually, like, have lived with inflation, above 4%. Like, it seems like of another era, another time, like black and white television and inflation. It's like some other era. And so most people haven't lived with inflation at all. And he's making the point that, like, maybe it's a generation that's going to have to live with some inflation again, because we're talking about a boost to the domestic economy that is, in its size, the only parallel to it is World War II level spending. So that's a thing. Like, we'll see. Like, we'd all love to see some. The Fed talked about, we'd love to, be happy to see some inflation. We'd all love to see some inflation, but
I think that also raises the question of how you measure inflation. Obviously, this generation, my generation, I vaguely remember black and white TVs and inflation, and my first paper route bank account paying me like 18% interest.
Right.
Which was outstanding back in.
I remember my father being extremely excited about when he refinanced his mortgage to 9%.
Totally. I remember my mother being really excited about getting a 10% mortgage in 1979.
The inflation we have now is education, childcare, healthcare costs. That's the inflation. And we have obviously asset price inflation.
Housing too, yeah.
Yeah. And so the generations past, more recent generations have experienced it, but just in a very different way, and in a way that isn't particularly well captured in the core PCE, which is at 1.4%. If you went around and asked people, how do you feel about the cost of living being so tame?
Right, but look, I feel like an idiot. I feel like an idiot talking about inflation. But like, here we are, we're talking about it because what if, J&J is just appealed to the FDA for emergency approval of their one dose vaccine. I've been saying that for a couple of weeks that I think this, like, it has a feel like we are going to accelerate much faster on vaccine delivery, and people are going to jump the gun on returning to normal, because we're going to see we're already seeing decline in cases and hospitalizations and deaths. I think that's going to accelerate into the spring. People are going to have vaccines. They're going to be bursting to get out. And I think we're going to see economic activity returning much faster than we might probably thought reasonable a couple of months ago. So if you have that happening, plus this like super jet fuel of money,
game on.
It's not, to me, it's not unreasonable to have that discussion about inflation or just money going into places like, one of the theories around GameStop was like, idle dudes sitting around with, excess savings to go spend on kooky things like GameStop. They have a lot less excess savings today than they did before. That money's been shuffled around a little bit, but there are consequences for having excess money floating around in different places.
I have a question going back to the triggers. So I love the idea of triggers, but why not take it a step farther and put in this package long-term triggers? So when the economy goes into recession, when the unemployment rates hit some sort of level, that just Congress cut you a check. We increase unemployment benefits. Do you think that's possible? That could be included, or do you think it's good policy?
Well, I don't know whether it could be included. I think it's a really wise way to go. And there are people like Martha Gimbel, who's been Martha's been an advocate for this. Claudia Sahm, Jason Furman, right? Lots of people who are and I'm an advocate for it too. I think like automatic stabilizers make sense. It has always been,
and it showed that it really worked back in April.
Yeah, like you have this situation where people are out of work. We're seeing a downturn in the economy, and you have this fight over extending the federal extension of unemployment benefits. Then extending it, it's 26 weeks. The recessions don't last 26 weeks; they last longer than that. Especially, they're usually a slow return. So you'd rather see it as an auto.
I think that stuff is really interesting and should be explored further. But I also think that it requires a fairly sophisticated understanding and reading of both the economic side of the equation and the political side of the equation, because Congress isn't able to tie the hands of future Congresses, and the legislation is littered with examples of fixes that get changed literally every Congress. That was a policy that they came up with in the past, and this sort of thing. So you have to have, the most interesting example of something like this, which isn't exactly, I think, what you're talking about, but when they implemented the kind of spending cuts, the sequestration piece during the Obama administration, there was I would say that at the front end, there was a difference of political opinion on whether that stuff would happen or not. And so kind of calibrating political momentum with how you can incorporate kind of some of the economic triggers into that. You need to understand both sides of it, because just a straight economic, it's a straight piece of legislation that has an economic trigger baked into it isn't necessarily going to happen if the politics don't support that. So you really have to kind of understand all the dynamics.
But it works with, it works with food stamps, obviously. Like, so, food stamps it's an entitlement, and you can go, you apply and you get them as long as you qualify, and then it goes away when you're back to work. So that's so it works with that. I think, but you make a really important point. It's like one of the things that's an issue when you have an economic downturn, whether it is or is not associated with, some kind of financial crisis, or in this case, a health crisis, is that it's not, unemployment isn't the only problem. Unemployment is usually the result of other disruptions in the economy. And usually there's some effort to deal with those other disruptions in the economy. But you need a vehicle to get that done. You need some pressure to go do some of the actions that took place during the global financial crisis, or in this case, the health crisis. A nice vehicle is to have the pressure of doing unemployment insurance. And so part of the problem is that screwed up government where we can only, you can attach things to must pass bills. And if you're in a recession, unemployment extension is a must pass bill. And so it's a nice vehicle to actually go get these other things done and to get people to vote for things they might not otherwise want to vote for.
That's totally right. I think that there's this relates to earmarks and some of there's been discussion again recently about the wisdom of whether getting rid of those, if saving $1 million on some project was worth the dysfunction of Congress of not being able to pass, $1 billion legislation. And so you always got to be careful of the unintended consequences on good government reforms. You never know where it's going to land.
Yeah. All right. Hey, let's take a break and we'll come back. You've been listening to the Macrocast.
The Sadie Collective's 2021 annual conference will take place on February 19th and 20th, celebrating Dr. Alexander's 100th anniversary of becoming the first African American to earn a PhD in economics. The two-day virtual event will feature leading Black women across economics, business, tech, healthcare, and policy. Email Sadie Collective at hamiltonps.com or visit sadiecollective.org/SACE 2021 for more information.
And we're back on the Macrocast. Tony Fratto here. Matt, you teased us earlier with, the note. I know you guys did a bunch of work on taking a look at, the whole chapter of the Trump economy. I mean, we'll probably be talking about it for a long time in the future too, as we do go through benchmarking and things. But your first look on first take on the Trump economy in the wake of the final Trump administration, Trump era jobs report.
Yeah, I thought our excellent jobs team was going to have to scramble more this morning on recalculations, but 49,000 doesn't even come into rounding consideration with some of the numbers over the course of 4 years. But yes, Trump, this is the last report for the Trump era on jobs. Where do we kind of hash out on this stuff? Slightly more than half of the 22 million jobs that were lost at the beginning of the pandemic are back. And you still have 4 million in the long-term unemployed category. When you look over the totality of his term, he ended up losing close to 3 million jobs, lower at the end than at the beginning, which has not happened in at least the recent era of where it's where jobs are actually lower at the end at the beginning. What's actually really interesting is that our team did just an extrapolation of trend lines for a forecast of what the jobs numbers would have landed at on Earth 2.0, where the pandemic did not happen. And what they found was while he ended up losing 3 million, he actually would have created close to 9 million jobs over one term absent the pandemic, absent a lot of other stuff. If just the trend line had continued, who knows? We're late in the cycle as it was. But 9 million jobs over one term is significant. He would not have passed, and Trump bragged very early on that he was going to be the best jobs president in history. He would not have, if that, again, hypothetically, if somehow he were able to continue that over 2 terms, because it's a little complicated to compare 1 term to 2-term presidencies, but Clinton was close to 23 million new jobs over that 8-year period. Obama over 8 years was a little over 11 million new jobs. So, the piece that we were talking about earlier in terms of, I think, part of the lesson that economists are taking from the Trump era is that there is more rope in the economy and more room for stimulus on the fiscal and monetary side, and that we can run hot for a little bit. So it'll be interesting, even despite kind of the headline number being bad on the back end, I think that understanding kind of the economic frame and thinking that people are looking at this from is that if you look at the underlying numbers prior to that, it really was an economy that was humming along pretty good. And I think that the consensus is, how do we get back to that as fast as we can?
I was wondering your thoughts on the trajectory of jobs. There's a question, obviously, the Fed, when they talk about the recovery, they're focused on the near-term downside and the healing that has to go on in particularly the service sector jobs. The pandemic has accelerated a lot of trends. One of those trends, which we assume perhaps it's accelerated, is the use of automation and other things that might impede this the recovery process. Do you think that that's going to come into play over the next few years? Is there a risk in your mind, Matt, of structural unemployment as automation and other labor saving aspects, even self-driving technology comes into play?
I mean, I think the thing that you have to believe in order to think that technological innovation outpaces, I mean, basically what that frame of question, I mean, this is like kind of the technology destroying jobs, or does it help jobs with better productivity and all the rest of the stuff. The reason you would believe that would be true in my mind is if you think that technology is advancing at a rate that people are not capable of adopting or reskilling, right? So some really interesting economic research has centered around age of workers in a company and how that company performs in terms of growth and that sort of thing, right? Thinking about kind of cohorts of adoption and how people are able to, when I'm helping my parents try to sign up for their COVID vaccine, returning to like my youth as a 12-year-old where I'm setting like the VCR to record or whatever, there's an element of how quickly can workers adapt to the changes that are coming. So on the downside in this environment, I would say, okay, companies are really accelerating innovation and adoption of some of these things, and there's going to be need for less workers on the back end. The flip side, I would say, is that, people, individual actors, as opposed to firm actors, don't have a choice anymore to adopt this. I mean, it's no longer viable to kind of have your emails printed out for you, or like not know how to do Zoom or some of this stuff. I mean, a lot of this, people can learn, and these are learnable skills. And the question in my mind is really, did this exercise force some of the learning that maybe workers in the past were a little reluctant to engage in? And if so, I think you'll see benefit to the positive. But it's certainly going to result in changes and churn and all the rest of it that, we might have as much destruction in the creative destruction over the next couple of years as creativity, and we'll just have to see.
There are other big factors going on. Is something I think about with when you talk about the nominal numbers in job creation. For most of our history, you could make an argument that there, to a large degree, it's a function of increasing size of the working age population in the country. Also, right, we should create more jobs in 4 years, even at a steady state. But we're actually seeing declines in the working age population in the United States. Like, it flattened off in since about 2014, 2015. We are not. This is not an increasing working age population country. We need to get back to increases in the size of the working age population. But that's what makes, actually, and truthfully, and to be fair, the job creation in the first few years, the end of the Obama years also, and the first years of the Trump administration, that's pretty powerful job creation. Those are big numbers for when you're in the midst of a decreasing workforce.
Yeah, it's a great point, Tony. And like the underlying population revisions in this job report, I think, are a signal of trends that we have to watch in the future. And if you look at it from that perspective too, you may have technology efficiencies as a dimension that's saving our butt in a context where you can't count on workforce expansion. Or, I mean, you don't have to be old enough to remember inflation to remember the coming war for talent era of like the late 1990s and early 2000s, when people were really preoccupied by retiring baby boomers and who's going to take their slot and all that sort of stuff. And we might be hitting some of those trends in the years to come as well. I mean, one thing I'll tell you is, like, and we haven't really gotten to the aftermath point of the pandemic. We had the 9/11 Commission, we had the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. We don't have the Coronavirus Commission yet. That will come. The other thing that people, I've seen a few pieces on this, but I don't think the full implication is there, is, there's going to be a baby bust as a result of this as well, in all likelihood.
Really important point. Yeah.
Here's a nugget for you, is that the post-financial crisis baby bust is going to hit the job market around 2030, just as the last of the baby boomers are leaving the job market, right? So these like big fat crisis episodes that we live through, they just reverberate through the economy for years. So, I mean, it's going to be, I mean, back to John's original point, it's going to be a lot of big shifts in a lot of different ways. And it's tough to predict kind of where some of this stuff will hash out over time.
You also have a generation of lower income kids who haven't been in school and they're never coming back.
I think you talk about when you think about things that you know and don't know. If you had asked me a year ago, what would be a result of people working from home in the house together, would be a baby boom, not a baby bust.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If there's one thing people learn, it's like being in a house with kids for all day long. They've reached their limit, like no more of this.
One of the other things is a lesson. Certainly, if you're sitting in the policymaking seats in Washington, D.C., you've looked at this episode and redefined what national security is. And, we've seen this as there's the drive to reshoring was something that the Trump administration had already set in train. Obviously, it was bring home American jobs, buy America, that sort of thing. And it's taken on, at least in major components, a very much a defense against this kind of stuff. We've the pharmaceutical supply lines, PPE, all that stuff. There's a redefinition of what we need to have in the U.S. as the critical functions. That's what the Department of Homeland Security has, their 55 critical functions of the United States. It's very interesting. It's a very interesting list, and they're prioritizing making sure that those are as domestically sound and really reliable in times of crisis as we need them to be. And so that is, these are things that the Trump administration, as I said, had kind of kicked off with a different tone, but they've taken on a greater significance, I think, in some ways.
Okay. Hey, let's take our last break, and we'll come back and look ahead a little bit. You've been listening to the HPS Macrocast.
On the first Friday of every month, HPS analyzes the latest jobs and labor market data in a digestible format. Sign up for our reports at hamiltonplacestrategies.com or on Twitter at HPS Insight.
We're back on the Macrocast. Brendan, anything to look forward to next week?
Actually, going back to your inflation point, we do get inflation data in the U.S. and Europe, and the last two prints have been higher than expectations. So on the core PCE, which is the one that the Fed looks at, we're up to 1.5% from a low of 0.9% back in the depths of the pandemic. So still far from the 2% target, but it's getting back on people's radars. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the impeachment trial starts next week.
I think it does. I think there'll be some entertainment. I don't know what that's going to mean for macroeconomic news, but
we'll see what it does to the stimulus negotiations. They're obviously contending there, and it's a tight schedule in the Senate. But we'll see. Also, the Super Bowl, Tom Brady in it again.
Oh yeah,
yep.
I might watch. I don't know. We'll see. I'm kind of bored by this game. I don't want to be.
Man, it's bittersweet, but our Tom Brady into the history books. We'll see. I mean, he's something else.
He is something else. I have to give him credit. He's there, and Belichick is not. All right, guys, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week on the Macrocast.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.